Hey everybody, we're going to be reviewing some fantastic beers that I'm proud to talk about, and we're going to start off tonight with KBS. This is some bourbon barrel aged imperial stout. If that does not get you excited, it also has coffee and vanilla. If that doesn't get you excited, you should probably go watch the Teletubbies, because this is for people over the age of 18 or 21, depending on what country you're in. Now, Founders Brew Co. is a very enjoyable brew company. This is the first beer that they aged in oak barrels. It's something that they've been doing year-round. There's a debate on the quality year to year, but I'm here to talk about the tasting notes of this one in particular. I'm excited. You should be excited. Let's get into it. I'm going to pour a little hard on this one. It is an imperial stout, and a lot of beers will tell you to pour hard to get the proper head on it. Look at that. Absolutely gorgeous. Picture perfect on that baby. Look at it. Gotta love it. Full finger head. I love the way that it sits. It is obsidian. It's not transparent at all. Very dark brown, black color. The foam top is sitting beautifully. I love the visuals of this beer, and you can see that it has not even dissipated since the pour. Absolutely gorgeous. On the nose, you get the coffee instantly. A little bit of vanilla. I'm not really detecting too much of the tannins of the oak barrel on this one. But last time I had it, it was definitely there on the flavor profile. Only one way to find out. A lot going on with this beer. Very strong bitterness, but also very strong sweetness. Not in the same way that you would expect a cappuccino to be bitter and sweet, but you get a bitterness not just from the coffee, but I think the oak age is going to affect it a lot, the same way that you're going to get added flavors from the oak when you're drinking a whiskey. It's the same thing with this here. Now, to my knowledge, this has only been aged in whiskey barrels about a year. Most whiskeys are aged quite a bit longer than that. If it's actually called a straight bourbon, it has to be aged over 3 years, or it has to say how many years that it's been aged. The aging process is different from place to place. I'm assuming that all these barrels were in Michigan, where this beer is brewed. I don't know what the weather is like in Michigan, but for example, in Texas, when you're brewing whiskey, you're dealing with the wood absorbing and letting go of the whiskey, and it's actually a problem in Texas for whiskey to get too much of the wood oak, whereas in Scotland, where the climate is just cold, it may take a lot longer to get the dignity of the oak. So let's go ahead and go in for a second pull and see what the flavor profile is now that I've adjusted the flavor a bit. You get a good bit more of the barrel on that. I suppose you might have to adjust your palate to a little bit. But yeah, you get a good caramelness of the barrel. It's gonna have to be from the barrel if there's no caramel malts added to this. You get the smokiness of the coffee. This is just a fantastic beer. It's got a lot of layers to it, and I'm an advocate of Founders Brew Co. I'm very excited to try more of their product. Founders Brew Co. had nothing to do with this episode, as did any of the other breweries that have been filmed tonight. But yeah, Founders KBS highly acclaimed flavored stout. Alright, next in line tonight is going to be, and I'm not going to say I'm pronouncing any of this correct, I'm going to call this Omme 3 Philosophers. Now, I've not had any of the products of this brewery. The beer store that I like to go to that has a rotating stock of beers said that this is a new member of their family. They're not super familiar with it. But it was sitting right next to Shimmy.
Chimay.
It's a mixture, which is weird to me as well, of a quadruple and what is called a click or kirk or something like that. Once again, not guaranteeing any of these pronunciations. So I'm very curious about it. I'm also wanting to know if it's a living beer like the Chimay. I like the way that it's corked. I'm assuming it has a second fermentation process. Because of the cork itself, you can see that this is not a bottle pop. And the reason for that is if it is a living beer, that means that the yeast is inside of it and it is alive. So the pressure, the atmosphere is going to be constantly putting pressure against the cork. That's why they have this little handy jigger here. So let's open it and let's all be surprised together. Eventually. Doesn't everyone love that sound? If I was a wine connoisseur, wouldn't I do this real quick? Not getting much off the cork. Very beautiful. I love that. Definitely looks like a quadruple, however you pronounce that. Nice head, full finger. Dark brown tint, a little deeper than copper. Mild, light brown. Yeah, I see a good bit of agitation in there. I'm willing to bet that the yeast is alive in this guy. Let's see what happens. I would say sweet fruit, also fermented fruit, pears, apples, apricots. This is very nice. I always love the smell of quadruples. Let's go ahead and get a pull. First pull. Very good. Not quite as much going on as I wanted it to be. I'm not sure about the mix blend. I'm not overly familiar with that. It is relatively strong at 9.7 ABV, if I'm reading that correct. Let's go and get my second pull before I give the tasting notes. Combination of dry fruit and fermented fruit. The taste is a lot like the smell. I'm also getting a bit of maybe a broccoli towards the end over there. So a little bit vegetal towards the end. But I would say the initial fruit taste makes it almost worth it. but sadly, the evolution seems to die a bit quickly. I had a quadruple recently, I'd say last month, that 6 of them cost about the same price as this. And by volume, I think that would have been the better deal. But this is for sure still a good beer. I'd like to learn more about it. I don't want to say anything bad about Omme Gang, OMME Gang, whoever they are. I'm looking forward to seeing what else they have. I noticed one other beer that they produce at my local beer store that I often use, and hopefully I can do that review next episode. With that being said, I'm going to give one more pull and see if there's anything else I'm missing from the tasting notes. A little bit of sour fruit as well. Mildly sour. I really still say it's pear, apricot, apple. Maybe, I would say 2 different kinds of apple. I would say it'd be a golden apple as well as a sweet apple. So it's got that. But yeah. Is it worth the price? $14 for this guy. Is it a living beer? I don't think so. It's just probably bottled this way because it's pretty, fancy, and stuff like that sells. I mean, Buddha beer is a beer that's not very special, and it's shaped like a fat Buddha. And people buy it because it's shaped like a fat Buddha. So, give this a try, and if you think it's worth it, let me know. If you don't, let me know. But regardless, it's not in any way a bad beer. I just am not sure that I would pay for this once again. And that's really all I have to say on it. Still a good drink though. Recommend it. Alright everybody, the moment has come. We're going to talk about something big, bad, and dangerous. And you know it's dangerous because it was made by monks. And we all know what those Shaolin monks do. Well, this doesn't have anything to do with Shaolin monks. These monks brew beer. So they kick ass in their own way. This is Shimmy Blue.
Excuse me, my boy. My monks make Chimay, not Shimmy.
Now, this is normally considered a brown ale, and I've kind of given brown ale a bit of a bad rap before, and the reason being is I think a lot of people are making beers, they turn out brown, they don't have a lot of tasting notes, and they're like, yeah, just call it a brown ale, fuck it. This is what's known as a living beer. It is a beer that goes through a second fermentation process inside of the bottle, and you can actually see on the back of the bottle that it discusses that this beer is under pressure and it can be dangerous. So it's similar to how champagne is. It is pressurized, and this gets involved in the cork, as I spoke a little bit earlier. That's why I thought the other one was living beer. I'm pretty sure I was mistaken. It did not seem as palatable as Chimay. No. Chimay Grand Reserve is very popular. It's very sought after. And it is a bit expensive. It runs at about $16 for this bottle that's in my hand. Now that's more than most people even care to spend on wine. Well, people I know. So, that being said, it might not be for everybody, but beers like this, living beers with the second fermentation process, really got me further into craft beer. And I recommend trying it if you can't get your hands on Golden Rock. I would just recommend Chimay. And I think Chimay is going to be more readily available. Chimay is made by the Trappist monks. If I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry.
Damn right you are.
They, at the time, did not have the abundance of clean running water that we have. Beer was just safer. And that's why this was something that was served at church. Much like a Catholic church. If it was a Catholic church, I don't remember. With all that being said, let's get into the tasting notes, the smell, and the look of this Chimay. This cork has a good bit of smell. Decadent. Fruity. Almost smells like a fruit punch you would get at the convenience store or something. Take that as you will, positive or negative. A lot more complex smells out of the bottle. Let's get into the glass. I'm going to give this more of a light pour. So, because the yeast is alive, and this is something I've noticed with Golden Rock, it gets a lot of head. I can relate. But this, basically what's going on is the yeast is still consuming the sugars that are inside of this beer. So that's why we're getting this extra carbonation. It's a living thing, essentially. Fun fact, if you don't know, the yeast that is made for brewing is called Saccharomyces, and it is a fungi, not a bacteria. At least last I learned about it. Very, very dark. You can tell it's not a stout or a porter, but it's, I mean, you could call it brown for sure, but it's a very dark brown. I guess that's what separates this from any other brown ale, assuming it is actually a brown ale. The research on this is a little difficult. I love the foam top. Something I like to do sometimes is see if I can drop a bottle cap on top of it. Obviously this doesn't have a bottle cap, to see if the bottle cap actually pierces the foam top. But it is very frothy. I wish there was a way to point it at the camera appropriately to give you how the foam looks on this beer. It is very elegant. It is very decadent. I can't brag enough about this beer, I feel like. With that being said, let's get into the nose. So the nose is earthy, floral, and fruity, which is very difficult to pull off. You get some elements, some metallic notes, as well as some grassy notes, something like maybe celery or spinach. But you also get a good bit of floral notes in there, or fruity notes in there as well. So you get some pear, some wild berry. And on top of all that, it's just very inviting. Like, it makes you want to have a drink. Like, it's not hot. I'm not sweating. I'm holding a drink in my hand, and I desperately want to drink it, even though I don't have to. My body is telling me to, even though it is not an instinctual necessity. So, that being said, first pull. Everything I remember, evolution for days. Evolution for days. Absolutely fantastic. It has, the thing about living beers, I guess it's just because the yeast is still there and it's still fermenting. It has the ability to interact with your palate to the point that you don't even really know what to say. It changes from being a drink to an experience. And that's really one of the main things I talk to people about who consider themselves beer advocates, or some people might even consider them cicerones, or just whatever. If you haven't had this one, I recommend anything that is a living beer. Shimmy is just one example. Golden Rock is another. I mean, just look into it, do some research on it. The second fermentation process, I think, really brings a lot to the table. So let's go ahead and do a second pull, and I'm going to try to give a step-by-step process of what I'm experiencing. Immediately you get a lot of yeast. The fruit comes forward. I would say this is going to be more wild fruit. This would probably be, I would call this a fruity note that I'm not familiar with. And I normally don't use this example or examples like this, but it reminds me of a friend of mine who was Jamaican, and he discussed fruit that was local to him and the experiences he had with it. So I would speculate that this is similar to fruits that are not readily available here in Texas, something that I just haven't had before. But it's for sure a fruity note. It's something reminiscent of fruit. Let's move forward with that. Like I said before, grassy notes as well. Very palatable grassy. I would say maybe not cabbage or lettuce, but it's going to be something like that. It's going to be something that's slightly watery as well as sweet. It's I can't advocate this beer enough. Like, it's, once again, a video not. Shimmy is a famous beer. They don't care about me in this YouTube video.
Shimei.
But do yourself a favor and try some Shimmy.
Shimei.
Now, it also is kind enough to tell you what they prefer you serve it in. It recommends using a goblet. This is obviously not a goblet, but the structure is similar enough to where you can kind of get away with it. The stilts, in my mind, only help you from keeping your body temperature from affecting the beer. But since this beer, to my recollection, is the second beer that Shimmy crafted, it was probably crafted years and years and years ago, before refrigerators and nonsense like that. So even having this warm probably would not affect the flavor profile too much. Make sure you store it properly. Make sure that you keep the yeast alive if you plan on having it in your fridge for a little while. Also keep in mind that the yeast being alive inside of this bottle is going to continue to get more alcoholic. So if it sits on the shelf or sits in your fridge for too long, it will grow in volume, and the pressure, from what I've heard, can actually grow as well, making the bottle dangerous to have around you, possibly explode. That could be hearsay, but it's something I feel like I should bring up as a disclaimer. If someone wants to buy this, set it in the bottom of their fridge, forget about it for 3 years, and all of a sudden the bottom of their fridge is covered in frozen yeast beer. I recommend Shimmy.
For the love of me, Shimei.
When I started this beer blog, I wanted to try Shimmy in particular.
My child, this video is blasphemous and misinformative.
I want to try Golden Drak in particular. I've had both of them before, so I should say try them again. But it has been years since I've had this guy, and it was everything I wanted. It was everything I needed. Everything I wanted in a beer. And it's probably everything you want and need in a beer, and I will advocate that. Give it a shot. Have a good night. This is Mike's Beer Blog. Spirits up.